Alan J. Lerner was a lyricist and playwright who worked in radio, film, and in musicals with composers, directors, and actors such as Frederick Loewe, Kurt Weill, Burton Lane, Vincente Minnelli, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, Leslie Caron, Rex Harrison, Julie Andrews, Audrey Hepburn, Leonard Bernstein, and briefly with Andrew Lloyd Webber towards the end of his life. Lerner produced some of the best musicals ever created with composer Frederick Loewe, such as Brigadoon, Paint Your Wagon, My Fair Lady, Gigi, and Camelot. He also had his failures as well. Spanning a career over a 40-year period, Lerner won 3 Oscars and 3 Tony Awards during his career. His personal life was turbulent and kept the gossip columns busy. He was accused of plagiarism by a lovesick critic and was married 8 times. 2 more than the actor Rex Harrison, who had 6 wives. 7 of Lerner's marriages would end in divorce. He once said,
"All I can say is that if I had no flair for marriage, I also had no flair for bachelorhood."
His father, Joseph, a wealthy businessman and autocrat, would have an indelible influence on the young Alan J. Lerner. This is the story of a man who claimed that no one knew him, yet his lyrics showed he was a romantic and one of the last of his generation. He played gin rummy with Larry Hart, who he worshipped. This is the story of a man who was expelled from school for smoking, lost an eye in a boxing bout from a left hook. Yet as they say, things happen in threes. Lerner one day was having lunch in the Private Lambs Club in New York in 1942. A German composer named Frederick Loewe was on his way to the toilets, but took a wrong turn going past Lerner's table, then seeing Lerner in his eye line, sat down at Lerner's table. Lerner knew who he was, known as Fritz to his friends. The conversation went something like this.
You're Lerner. You write lyrics, don't you?
I try.
Well, I write music. I don't have a lyric writer at the moment. Would you like to write with me? Why don't we try it together?
Why not?
Lerner writes in his autobiography, The Street Where I Live.
And thus, with a cigarette, a left hook, and a wrong turn to the men's room, I became a professional librettist.
Alan J. Lerner was born with a silver spoon in his mouth in New York in 1918 and was the second son of Joseph and Edith. Edward Jablonski writes in his book, a biography, Alan J. Lerner.
The Lerners occupied a spacious 17-room apartment on Park Avenue with a necessary staff of servants to please the madame and master. Alan J. Lerner was born into this luxurious but unloving environment.
Alan J. Lerner had an older brother named Richard and a younger brother named Robert. Lerner's father was a wealthy businessman and was part owner, along with his brothers, of a women's clothing chain named Lerner Stores Corporation. His father was an autocrat, womanizer, and favored Alan J. Lerner over his other children, which created some resentment. Also, such favoritism did not endear the young Lerner to his mother either. When Alan J. Lerner was born, his parents' marriage was on the rocks. A marriage of convenience for the boys, you might say. Lerner's mother had caught Joseph Lerner having secret assignations with women, and they eventually divorced. The 3 boys stayed with their mother. Lerner's relationship with his mother was not a close one, Jablonski writes.
Even though he lived with his mother, Lerner was not close to her. She did all the right things as was expected of a Park Avenue resident. Travels, the clothes, the schools, but affection was not given and she was intimidating.
Lerner's mother was different from his father, as she devoted her time with the children, taking them on trips to Europe, visiting museums, concert halls and cathedrals. Lerner went to Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School and went to dancing classes on a Sunday. He started to learn the piano at the age of 5, and his father would take him to Madison Square Garden to watch boxing bouts and the theater where they would see musical shows by George and Ira Gershwin. Jerome Kern and Rodgers and Hart. When he was around 12 years old, the lure of show business had been firmly planted, Lerner writes.
I had only one ambition, and that was to be involved someday, somehow, in the musical theater.
It was Lerner's father who had a love of English planted those seeds that would eventually lead to Alan J. Lerner having a career as a lyricist and librettist.
Oh, sweet and lovely lady, be good. Oh, lady, be good to me. I am so awfully misunderstood. So, lady, be good to me. Oh, please have some pity. I'm all alone in this big city. I tell you, I'm just a lonesome babe in the wood. Oh, lady, be good to
Lerner remarked, it was his father who lit the fire in me about the theatre. Lerner was tinkering at the piano and writing songs in his teenage years. But his father, at this stage, took no notice, as long as the young Lerner did not embarrass him. Lerner's father spoke 4 languages and was adamant that his son spoke good English. He was always on at Lerner about his vocabulary, his diction, and even whilst Lerner was at school, he would send letters home, only for them to be sent back to him for corrections to be done, at the behest of his father. Here is Lerner speaking to Roy Plomley on the Desert Island Discs radio program in 1978 about his father.
Now, Alan, you're a New Yorker, and it says here, educated Columbia Grammar School, New York City, B. Dales, Hampshire, England. Now, how did that happen?
Well, my father was an absolute fanatic about the English language. And he really sent us, I have 2 brothers, we were all sent to school in England to learn the language. He didn't think anybody spoke it very well in New York, and I think he was probably right.
Was going to the theatre part of your training in English?
Very well. My parents were divorced when I was very young, and I was very close to my father. I lived with my mother. But he was constantly sending for me, and he would take me to the theater. And he took me to musicals all the time, which he happened to have a special fondness for. So I grew up loving the musical theater, and actually when I was 12 years old, I was firmly convinced that I would do nothing else with my life but be in the musical theater somewhere, somehow.
Were you taught music?
Well, I studied music. I started studying the piano when I was 5, and my first ambition was to be a composer.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at Harvard, I spent the summers at the Juilliard School learning advanced harmony. And then when I was about 20, I made a record of everything I'd written and decided I had absolutely no talent at all. But I had been writing lyrics for the things that I had written, and I thought I'd better become a writer.
Lerner was 12 when he was packed off to England to learn English and was there for 2 terms. It was also at this time he developed an interest in reincarnation and the occult. He once asked his father, "Where do we go when we die?" His father's answer was,
"Nowhere, and if anyone ever tells you differently, he is lying to you."
His father was not interested in the occult or any such psychic nonsense. However, Lerner's interest would never leave him, and he would later revisit the subject in his work. His time in England was cut short in order to get his teeth straightened and returned home to Manhattan, where he attended Columbia Grammar and then on to Choate in Connecticut, a private boarding school, where also a certain future president named J.F. Kennedy attended, and one of Kennedy's rebellious activities at the school was to blow up a toilet seat with a firecracker. Lerner was on the road to have a career in the civil service at the behest of his domineering father. However, it never happened, much to the delight of the somewhat rebellious Lerner, whose passion lay elsewhere, was expelled for smoking. His father was outraged by his behavior and sent him off to Harvard University, Lerner writes.
This flagrant act of disobedience so enraged my father that he canceled my diplomatic career and sentenced me to 4 years of hard labor at an American university, which was a little like punishing a prisoner by kicking him out of jail.
So in 1936, Lerner found himself at Harvard, which brought him closer to boxing, the Hasty Pudding Club and Broadway. Whilst at Harvard, he took flying lessons in preparation for war, if it came. Lerner continued to go to the theatre, taking in shows by Cole Porter, Rogers and Hart, and others who he saw as giants in the theatre. He became well versed in the songs and lyrics Edward Jablonski writes.
He became an authority on show tunes, often playing them for his classmates. One night as he walked along Mount Auburn Street, he was heard to exclaim,
I want to write songs.
Lerner's father, Joseph, had certain attitudes towards women and that they were inferior to men. He would impart some advice on how to deal with women to Lerner when he was 18.
Let me tell you something about women, son. You will have your troubles with them. We all do. There will be arguments. A marriage may not work. There may be times when you get into bed and not be able to function. But always remember this. No matter what happens, it's her fault.
Lerner did not share his father's attitude, although his father was right in one sense. Marriages do fail, something Lerner would later learn. Lerner writes in his autobiography, The Street Where I Live, about his father's attitude on women.
The extraordinary part is that he truly believed it and viewed the romantic streak in my nature as a child's disease that I would outgrow, or so he hoped. I did not, and whatever I have written clearly indicates that.
How to handle a woman? There's a way, said the wise old man, a way known by every woman since the whole rigmarole began. Do I flatter her? I begged him answer. Do I threaten or cajole or plead? Do I brood or play the gay romancer? Said he, smiling, no indeed. How to handle a woman? Mark me well, I will tell you, sir. The way to handle a woman is to love her, simply love her, merely love her, love her.
Harvard had a boxing club, which Lerner was keen to join. Another seed planted by his father, a student at the university, described Lerner as a thin, wiry, dynamic character with a big smile and big glasses. Lerner did some sparring in the boxing club, and as he recalls, things did not go too well.
One day in the boxing ring, my mind wandered, my guard dropped, and a left hook to the side of the head removed all sense from my expression for the next 2 weeks. New England's clear winter days grew murkier and murkier.
With some treatment, he was back at university, but unable to continue with boxing and flying lessons. In the end and over time, he had lost his left eye. He had an artificial eye fitted. This unfortunate outcome would have a major impact on the young Lerner. However, in the meantime, as flying lessons and boxing were out of bounds for Lerner, he was able to channel his talents in another direction. Harvard had a social club named the Hasty Pudding Club, which according to Edward Jablonski was
pledged to cultivate the social affections and cherish the feelings of friendship.
He goes on to say it was a place for Bostonians to go and taste the pudding and tobacco, the pudding itself being an assortment of ingredients, for example, molasses, cornmeal, ginger, milk and eggs, which became a snack for breaks in rehearsals. Initially, the club put on parodies of dramas, then eventually dramas with plots. Lerner was involved as the lyricist in a show called So Proudly We Hail, which was a send-up spoof of Hitler and Mussolini in Europe at that time. He also worked on another show called Fair Enough about cafe society in 1939, where he provided his first songs, for example, Chance to Dream, and For Me to You, he was now on his way to becoming a fully fledged songwriter. Lerner graduated from Harvard in 1940 and got married to Ruth Boyd, his first wife, who he met in Venice when he was on vacation with his mother. They had one daughter together, Susan. He also became a member of the Lambs Club, a private members club in New York that supported people in the arts putting on activities since 1874. He was also writing for radio at this time, over 500 scripts. Due to his monocular vision, he was classed as 4F by the government, which meant he was deemed unfit for military service due to having only one eye. This classification deeply affected Lerner as he saw his brothers and friends go off to war.
Anguished and ashamed that I was not with them, I deserted the old familiar places and faces of my youth and moved from East 70s to West 44th Street, first to the Lambs Club, where I met the first man who ever encouraged me to believe that I might have a future as a lyric writer. He also happened to be one of the great lyric writers of our time, Larry Heart of Rogers.
You saw me standing alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. Blue you knew just what I was there for. You heard me sing a prayer for someone I really could care for. And then there suddenly appeared before me the only one my arms could ever hold. I heard somebody whisper, please adore me. And when I looked, the moon had turned to gold. Now I'm no longer alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own.
Lerner played gin rummy with Larry Hart. They both played badly, but for Lerner he made himself available to keep Larry company, and Larry was usually drunk and very lonely. Lerner writes about Larry Hart.
He was kind, endearing, sad, infuriating, and funny, but at the time I knew him, he was in a devastating state of emotional disarray. The word genius, like most superlatives these days, has grown feeble from overwork. But if lyric writing is worthy of a genius, it had to be Larry.
Blue moon, now I'm no longer alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own.
Lerner did try to serve in the forces, even appealing his classification, only to be rejected, which only added to his frustration.
They won't take me unless the Nazis get to Rockefeller Plaza.
Lerner had no choice to stay in New York, nursing his wounds of being unable to continue flying or serve his country. He was writing for radio and going to the theater. He started writing copy for an advertising agency with a salary of $50 a week to begin with, he writes.
Immediately upon graduation from college, I became a radio writer on the theory that anything I wrote in the morning of my 20s was bound to teach me something, and it did. It taught me never to be afraid of a deadline.
He did on occasion lose sleep in order to meet deadlines, but gave it up because he got restless, but no ulcers, and he wasn't spending time with his family, Edward Jablonski writes.
He was very busy and an ambitious writer whose dedication to his career left little room for family life.
Lerner wrote lyrics for the Lamb's Gambol, an annual show put on by the Lambs Club, and in 1942 he was about to meet someone who would change his life. Frederick Loewe was born in Berlin in 1901 and was a pianist and composer. His father Edmund was an actor and singer who played in the Berlin production of The Merry Widow. The family were invited to America by David Belsacco, a theatre impresario in the early 1920s. However, Edmund, a gambler, died of a heart attack, leaving the young Loewe and his mother to fend for themselves. Loewe did different jobs to earn money, even dabbled in boxing like Lerner, and used his talents as a pianist to play the piano as a rehearsal pianist, and composing one of his commissions was called Great Lady, an operetta, Edward Jablonski writes.
Now in his mid-30s, Loewe seemed to be going nowhere beyond the Lambs Club. He returned to playing piano in clubs and doing other small musical jobs until that day in August 1942, when he took a wrong turn on his way to the men's room, spotted Alan J. Lerner in the Lamb's Grill, and went over to speak with him.
You're Lerner. You write lyrics, don't you?
I try.
Well, I write music. I don't have a lyric writer at the moment. Would you like to write with me? Why don't we try it together?
Why not?
In their partnership, Lerner was the book writer, sometimes referred to as the librettist, and was also writing the lyrics. Together they worked on The Life of the Party in 1942, which was not a great hit, but as Edward Jablonski writes,
the real importance of the show lay in the fact of Lerner and Loewe's union, and in the older man's belief that he and the kinetic, nervous, quick-thinking younger man would make ideal collaborators.
Their next project was What's Up in 1943, directed by George Balanchine. Then after that was The Day Before Spring. In 1945, a light romantic comedy, this show got a better reception, running for 5 months, which included a song called You Haven't Changed at All.
You haven't changed at all, though it's been a while. You're as I recall, the thrill of how you spoke then in the long ago. You awoke then when you said hello.
You haven't lost your touch, haven't changed the smile that I loved so much. The seasons change and may time fades into the fall. But you haven't changed at all.
These shows were not great hits, and Loewe was anxious about being successful in the theatre, having experienced failure with his efforts so far. For example, it took Loewe 14 years to get to Broadway, and he did not like to be associated with failures, and time was running out for him. Loewe was 17 years older than Lerner. Lerner, on the other hand, had a different attitude. He just wanted to create something new and memorable. Their next project was Brigadoon, where Lerner finally left radio, where he became restless, to work full-time on this musical, Lerner writes.
For a while I had a play about faith moving mountains. From there we went to all sorts of miracles occurring through faith, and eventually faith moved to town.
Brigadoon is about a mythical town in Scotland that only appears for one day and is stumbled upon by two Americans, whilst on a fishing trip, and a love story ensues. Edward Jablonski writes.
The show's score was its own miracle, particularly for the remarkable authenticity of its indigenous songs. Loewe afforded some insight into the show's cohesiveness when he described the partners' methods.
We always worked together, never separately.
Once the whole was more or less blocked out and the musical sequences determined, they would discuss the songs as they related to the plot and to the characters who sang them.
To be a roving lad, a roving and wandering life I had. On any lass I'd frown who would try to tie me down. But then one day I saw a maid who held out her hand, and I stayed and stayed. And now across the green go home with Bonnie Jean. Go home, go home, go home with Bonnie Jean. Go home, go home, I'll go home with Bonnie Jean.
This working style of the pair was also the method of the Gershwins, Rodgers and Hart, and Rodgers and Hammerstein. The musical Brigadoon was not an easy show to get produced and was rejected by everyone until Billy Rose, an American impresario, took an interest. But his terms were unacceptable to Lerner and Loewe. The show was finally staged by Cheryl Crawford, a Broadway producer. The show starred actors David Brooks and Marion Bell. Lerner drew inspiration from such people as J.M. Barrie, known for Peter Pan, and Lerner's idea for Brigadoon did bring about some controversy with certain people. Edward Jablonski writes about where the idea for Brigadoon came from or not.
Unusual conceptions, such as the idea for Brigadoon, do not simply materialize out of thin air. In the New Yorker review, John Lardner pointed to strong similarities between Lerner's book and a German folk tale entitled Germelshausen.
John Lardner dismissed this as just a coincidence, and the two works were different in terms of their endings. Jablonski writes,
"The German version has an unhappy ending. The coincidence would bedevil Lerner, despite the fact that all folklore is in the public domain and is every man's resource."
Go home, I'll go home with Bonnie Jean. Go home.
Brigadoon opened in New York in 1947 at the Ziegfeld Theatre. After some tryouts out of town, Lerner would usually be at the back of the theatre, biting his nails and near a door. Loewe, on the other hand, would pop in when the music was being played, then back out after. At the time of Brigadoon, Lerner's marriage to Ruth Boyd was falling apart. She asked him for a divorce, which he duly gave. He remarked to friends about the marriage.
I was getting bored.
Brigadoon was a sellout and got good reviews. The show was seen by a critic named George Jean Nathan, who took a shine to Marion Bell, who was in the production. He flattered her, inviting her to dine with him and sending her copies of his books. But she was having none of it. Someone else also had his eye on her. George Jean Nathan made a visit to see Marion Bell one day, only to find she was out with Alan J. Lerner. This must have enraged him, and he got jealous and vindictive to the point of accusing Lerner of plagiarism. The critic had a column in the journal American where he accused Lerner of stealing the Brigadoon plot from the German folk tale entitled Germelshausen. The New York Times gave Lerner a chance to rebuff these accusations, Jablonski writes.
This he did, tracing the evolution of the plot and dismissing Nathan's fulminations as rubbish.
He goes on to say Nathan gave up in the end, and the musical won the award for Best Musical, voted by the New York Critics Circle. The icing on the cake for Lerner was that he married Marion Bell, his second wife. His father, Joseph, was told about his son's success with Brigadoon by a friend who seen the reviews and remarked to Joseph,
"Your son is certainly a lucky boy."
Joseph Lerner was by this time riddled with cancer and unable to speak, but he was able to write on a pad the words,
"Yes, it's a funny thing about Alan. The harder he works, the luckier he gets."
After Brigadoon, Lerner worked with the composer Kurt Weill in 1949 on the concept musical called Love Life. The show told the story of a married couple, Sam and Susan Cooper, who never aged as they make their way from 1791 to 1948, with vaudeville-style numbers to illustrate the action. In a way, it was a forerunner to the musical cabaret, you could say. Kurt Weill died in 1950 of a heart attack at the age of 50, which cut short their partnership. Lerner went to Hollywood and worked on the Fred Astaire film, Royal Wedding, made by MGM and produced by Arthur Freed. It was in Hollywood where Arthur Freed brought composer Burton Lane and Lerner together to work on this film. Incidentally, Burton Lane had composed the music for the fantasy musical, Finian's Rainbow, in 1947, which played on Broadway more or less at the same time as Brigadoon. Both Brigadoon and Finian's Rainbow were eventually made into films. Brigadoon in 1954 and Finian's Rainbow in 1968. Royal Wedding, which was called Wedding Bells in England, had its problems with the actor June Allison becoming pregnant 10 days into production and unable to continue with her part, only to be replaced by Judy Garland, who was eventually sacked for unprofessional behavior, and to be replaced by Jane Powell. The film also was memorable for one of the scenes where Fred Astaire seemingly dances on the ceiling, accompanied by the song "You're All the World to Me." This was something Fred had wanted to do for quite some time, hoping to find someone who would actually do it. Apparently, the idea for this film came to him in the early hours of the morning. However, Lerner has a different memory of the scene.
One night I dreamed that Fred was dancing up the wall, all across the ceiling and down the other wall.
He later said it was one of his creative moments and told Arthur Freed about it.
I mentioned it to Arthur Freed at lunch the following day. And lo and behold, in the film, Fred danced up one wall across the ceiling and down the other wall.
It was Arthur Freed and his team who brought the scene together in the end, and the film proved to be a box office success. But Lerner was not enamored with the film's twists and turns.
Everywhere that beauty goes, you are. Everywhere an orchid grows, you are. Everything that's young and gay, brighter than a holiday. Everywhere the angels play, you are. You're like Paris in April and May. You're New York on a silvery day, a Swiss Alp as the sun grows fainter. You're Loch Lomond when autumn is the mater. You're moonlight on a night in Capri, and Cape Cod looking out at the sea. You're all places that leave me breathless, and no wonder you're all the world to me.
Lerner had split with Marion Bell in 1949, and he was now involved with his third wife-to-be, Nancy Olson, an actor, who appeared in the film Sunset Boulevard in 1950. They were married and settled in Manhattan. They had 2 daughters together, Liza and Jennifer. Lerner had ideas about doing a musical on the gold rush, as he had read some yarns, as he puts it, about the Old West some years earlier, but dropped the subject.
One day I promised myself, one day I would get back on the gold rush train.
Lerner went on to work on the film musical, An American in Paris, another love story produced by Arthur Freed and directed by Vincente Minnelli, music by George Gershwin, lyrics by Ira Gershwin. The film starred Gene Kelly and an 18-year-old French actor, Leslie Caron, in her first appearance on film. Lerner did the script in Palm Springs. Edward Jablonski writes,
Besides the Gershwin score, Lerner could turn for inspiration to the Life article that had originally captured Gene Kelly's interest about ex-GIs studying in Paris. On the GI Bill, Kelly would play an American painter who falls in love with a pretty French girl.
Lerner would embellish this love story with complications such as a rich American woman who wants to help Kelly's character, Jerry, with his career, but also harboring romantic feelings as well. And as we all know, love cannot be bought, it can only be given freely. The story is about love lost and won again. The standout ballet sequence won Kelly an Oscar for his work on the picture. The film in total won 6 Oscars in 1952, and Lerner the recipient of an Oscar for story and screenplay. Lerner was not at the ceremony. He was with his father in New York, who was about to go for another operation to do with his cancer. Lerner did not think he would win an Oscar for his work. Whilst his father was recovering from the operation, Lerner listened to the Oscars broadcast, and to his surprise, he heard his name being called out. He wanted to share the news with his father and asked a nurse to tell his father he had won. The nurse told him he already knew. His father, unbeknown to Lerner, had listened to the radio broadcast of the Oscars, then fell asleep again. Edward Jablonski writes,
Happy at this news, Lerner recalled a typical Joseph Lerner antic before being wheeled into the operating room. He had been given the standard release form to sign, noting that it indicated this was to be his 49th operation. He signed the form and added,
When it gets to 50, sell.
Lerner was keen to get back to Broadway.
The then Mrs. Lerner, Nancy Olson, recalled that after An American in Paris, Alan wanted to go back to the theater, but had no one to work with and wanted Fritz. She indicated that while her husband could work with others, but for Loewe, any other partnership was impossible. The two, for all their differences, somehow understood each other. Their individual personalities meshed when they worked together.
Nancy Olson said.
In a way, Fritz was sitting and waiting for Alan.
Jablonski goes on to say the pair complemented each other with Loewe's outbursts and Lerner's manipulation, and they forgave each other's idiosyncrasies. The time had come for Lerner to get back onto that gold train and go to No Name City.
I finally decided to write the life and death of a ghost town and to do it in a serious tone.
Var ska jag åka ner gatan? Jag vet bara jag vill tjäna pengar. Was macht es wie doch, dann ist der Weg.
Chuta我中我不足，我找到我把我不清楚，我记住他我要向前走。
Вставай, я замерзняю, когда буду я отвечаю, знаю, знаю, ожидаю. Got a dream, boy, got a song. Take your wagon and come along. Where am I going? I don't know. When will I be there? I ain't certain. What will I get? I ain't equipped to say. But who gives a damn? Who gives a damn? Who gives a damn? We're on our way. Where am I going? I don't know. Where am I headed?
Work began on Paint Your Wagon in 1947, bringing Loewe on board. The musical ran on Broadway in 1951 at the Sam S. Schubert Theatre and got mixed reviews. A New York critic, Wolcott Gibbs, wrote,
"The lyrics are the work of Alan J. Lerner, who is also credited with the book, though it's hard to believe everybody around the premises didn't just make it up as they went along. The lyrics lacked Oscar Hammerstein's honest sentiment and wonderful ingenuity of Cole Porter and Lawrence Hart, though admittedly, they were cheerful and eminently suitable for the period and locale."
A dig there and some praise by this critic.
Where am I going? I don't know. Where am I headed? I ain't certain. All I know is I am on my way. When will I be there? I don't know. When will I get there? I ain't certain. All I know is I am on my way. Got a dream, boy, got a song. Paint your wagon and come along. Where am I going? I don't know. When will I be there? I ain't certain. What will I get? I ain't equipped to say. But who gives a damn? Who gives a damn? We're on our way.
In 1969, the film version, also entitled Paint Your Wagon, was filmed in Oregon, starred Lee Marvin and Clint Eastwood. It was released with a revised plot and some new songs composed by Lerner and Andre Previn. Lerner worked on Huckleberry Finn and teamed up with Arthur Freed again. However, the film was cancelled and started to work on another project called Green Mansions. But his screenplay was rejected and the project was eventually abandoned. Jablonski writes,
The rejection of the screenplay he loved with a romantic, fantastic, exotic setting depressed Lerner, but he embarked on an uphill journey, not a downhill one. While the journey would not be without its obstacles, he would achieve pinnacles on Broadway and in Hollywood that he had not dared dream.
Look at her, a prisoner of the gutters, condemned by every syllable she utters. By right she should be taken out and hung for the cold-blooded murder of the English tongue. Heavens, what a sound. This is what the British population calls an elementary education.
Oh, come, sir, I think you picked a poor example.
Did I? Hear them down in Soho Square, dropping H's everywhere, speaking English any way they like. You, sir, did you go to school?
What do you take me for, a fellow?
Well, no one taught him take instead of tyke. Hear a Yorkshireman, or worse, hear a Cornishman converse. I'd rather hear a choir singing flat. Chickens cackling in a barn, just like this one. I ask you, sir, what sort of word is that? It's and gone that keep her in her place, not her wretched clothes and dirty face. Why can't the English teach their children how to speak? This verbal class distinction by now should be antique. If you spoke as she does, sir, instead of the way you do, why, you might be selling flowers too.
I beg your pardon, sir.
An Englishman's way of speaking absolutely classifies him. The moment he talks, he makes some other Englishman despise him. One common language, I'm afraid, we'll never get. Oh, why can't the English learn to set a good example to people whose English is painful to your ears? The Scotch and the Irish leave you close to tears. There even are places where English completely disappears. Well, in America, they haven't used it for years. Why can't the English teach their children how to speak? Norwegians learn Norwegian, the Greeks are taught their Greek. In France, every Frenchman knows his language from A to Z. Well, the French don't care what they do, actually, as long as they pronounce it properly. Arabians learn Arabian with the speed of summer lightning, and the Hebrews learn it backwards, which is absolutely frightening. But use proper English, you're regarded as a freak. Oh, why can't the English learn to speak?
Lerner was in Hollywood in 1952, working on the screenplay for the film version of Brigadoon. He was contacted by Gabriel Pascal, a film producer, who had secured the rights to some of George Bernard Shaw's works, one of which was Pygmalion, and wanted Lerner to compose the music for a musical on the subject. Lerner had to point out to him that he did not compose music, and he told Pascal that it was Fritz Loewe who did the music. Lerner and Loewe embarked on this project, but struggled to find a way in at that time and abandoned the project. Rodgers and Hammerstein also worked on it for over a year, and Oscar Hammerstein II told Lerner that Pygmalion could not be done. Lerner writes,
Pygmalion is a drawing room comedy, and no matter how hard we tried, we did not seem to be able to tear down the walls of the drawing room and allow the play to unfold in a setting and atmosphere that suggested music.
However, 2 years later, they found a way into Pygmalion by following the story and fitting the music in between the 5 acts to illustrate the action. Lerner and Loewe somehow found the luck to do the musical.
The Lord above gave man an arm of iron, so he could do his job and never shirk. The Lord above gave man an arm of iron, but with a little bit of luck, with a little bit of luck, someone else will do the blinking work. With a little bit, with a little bit, with a little bit of luck, you'll never work.
Lerner gives an example.
Eliza goes home, meets her father and 2 of his cronies. Brief scene between them, song by father to establish his character with a little bit of luck, and on to the next scene when Eliza comes to Wimpole Street.
This is how the pair proceeded, and there was no subplots or adding characters, which was the norm up until then.
With a little bit, with a little bit, with a little bit of luck, you'll get right in. Oh, you can walk the straight.
The pair took a leap of faith writing the musical, as at that point they did not have the rights to the story. The rights belonged to the Pascal estate, and it was a legal minefield compounded by the fact that Pascal had died leaving his estate in a legal mess. Moreover, to make matters worse, MGM wanted the rights as well, who put some pressure on Lerner not to go for the rights. Lerner was a bit reluctant to continue without the rights. However, Fritz had a different attitude.
My boy, there's only one thing to do. We will write the show without the rights. And when the time comes for them to decide who is to get them, we will be so far ahead of everyone else they will be forced to give them to us.
To cut a long story short, the pair eventually got the rights, and with a new title of My Fair Lady, they celebrated, but the celebrations were cut short by the death of Joseph Lerner in 1954, who had succumbed to his cancer. Lerner later regretted that his father did not live to see the success of his son's works. Lerner and Loewe were off to England, and with a little bit of luck, they will secure the services of Rex Harrison.
Wave a little bit, wave a little bit, wave a little bit, how lucky you will be. Wave a little bit, wave a little bit, wave a little bit of blooming love.
Lerner went to see the actor Rex Harrison to play the part of Higgins, and finally managed to get Rex Harrison on board, as Lerner writes.
The hurdles we had to overcome in pursuing him to play the part were high and mighty.
Julie Andrews was making her debut in The Boyfriend and was offered the role of Eliza. She managed to keep herself free to play the part, and Moss Hart directed the stage version of the musical. Whilst in London, Lerner did some research. He went to Covent Garden early in the morning to see how it worked, also to take in the atmosphere and language. He was there for 3 hours, as he said, and tried to get his head around Cockney rhyming language. For example, abso-bloody-lutely, Lerner writes.
I made use of it in the lyric of Wouldn't It Be Loverly, but changed it to abso-bloomin'-lutely.
It's rather dull in town, I think I'll take me to Paris. The missus wants to open up the castle in Capri.
Me doctor recommends a quiet summer by the sea. Wouldn't it be lovely?
All I want is a room somewhere far away from the cold night air, with one enormous chair. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? Lots of chocolate for me to eat, lots of coal making lots of heat, warm face, warm hands, warm feet. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? Oh, so lovely, sitting abso-bloomin'-lutely still. I would never budge till spring crept over me windowsill, someone's egg resting on my knee, warm and tender as he can be, who takes good care of me. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely, 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 lovely.
The musical went on to Broadway in 1956 at the Mark Hellinger Theatre in New York City. The musical won many awards. The critics remarked that My Fair Lady equaled the work of Rodgers and Hammerstein's musicals in terms of advancing the action. One critic described the musical as,
My Fair Lady is wise, witty, and winning. In short, a miraculous musical.
All I want is a room somewhere far away from the cold night air, with one enormous chair.
Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? Lots of chocolate for me to eat, lots of coal making lots of heat, warm face, warm hands, warm feet. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? Oh, so lovely. tender as he can be. Who takes good care of me, oh, wouldn't it be lovely, 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 lovely.
Here is Lerner with Michael Parkinson in 1978 talking about My Fair Lady.
Yes. Of course, My Fair Lady, when you talk about that, you talk about an extraordinary phenomenon, don't you? I mean, it's possibly been the most successful musical ever written, hasn't it?
Yes, I believe it has.
Has anybody ever estimated how much money that musical's made from the moment that you wrote it?
Well, it has been estimated roughly, well, as of a few years ago, considering they estimated it from a point of view of all the grosses of all the theaters and all the recordings that have been made, and it came to something like 500 million pounds.
500 million pounds?
Yes.
It's the truth.
So it didn't go to me, but I mean...
It went to that Arab that did it.
Yes, that's right. They've got it all, I assure you.
Yeah, that's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yes.
What made you want to do that as a property? And I mean, obviously, it wasn't a sort of a wild guess on your behalf.
Well, no. Somebody, a man named Gabriel Pascal, who owned the rights, a rather legendary figure who had acquired the rights from Shaw. As a matter of fact, I asked him how he ever, because he was an unknown producer, and he said that how he ever got those rights. And he said that he went out to Shaw's house today at St. Lawrence. And he knocked on the door, and he had a very thick Hungarian accent, and the maid came to the door and said, "Who is it?" He said, "I am Gabriele Pascal." And she said, "Who sent you?" And he said, "Tell him fate sent me." So Shaw was on the steps and heard that and came to the door and said, "What are you and what do you want?" He said, "I am a producer, and I wish to bring your great works to the screen." And Shaw said, "How much money do you have?" And Pascal looked in his pocket and he said, 12 shillings. And Shaw said, "Come in, you're the first honest movie producer I ever met." So that's how he got the rights. And,
really?
I have often walked down this street before, but the pavement always stayed beneath my feet before. All at once am I several stories high, knowing I'm on the street where you live. Are there lilac trees in the heart of town? Can you hear a lark in any other part of town? Does enchantment pour out of every door? No, it's just on the street where you live. And oh, the towering feeling, just to know somehow you are near. The overpowering feeling that any second you may suddenly appear. People stop and stare.
After the premiere of the film version of My Fair Lady in 1964, with a new Eliza, Audrey Hepburn, Lerner said at a party that he was suspicious of success.
It steals your defenses and leaves you on top of the world stark naked.
I have no particular nostalgia for failure, but success teaches you more. You learn from a failure what you've done wrong, but success shows you what you've done right.
After the success of My Fair Lady, Lerner was eager to start his next project. Lerner was, in effect, a workaholic, where he focused on his writings at the expense of all others, and his marriages suffered as a result. Lerner had a 3-picture contract with Arthur Freed and still owed him one more picture. Arthur Freed was working on doing a film adaptation of the Gabrielle Collette's novella of Gigi. Fritz Loewe had gone to Paris and its card tables to gamble his newfound wealth away and was not keen to work. Lerner was anxious to get Fritz to do the music for Gigi. However, Loewe was adamant about not working. Lerner was not put off by this and contacted Fritz via a cable. Fritz was in a casino in Cannes at this time and asked him if he would do the music for Gigi. He got a quick reply,
"No."
Lerner had read the story of Colette and came up with the idea of using Gaston's uncle, Honoré Lachaille, as the film's narrator for the story. He wanted Maurice Chevalier to play the part of the uncle. However, it was not a done deal. Freed had asked Lerner to do 4 songs with a different composer, as Fritz Loewe refused to do it. Lerner agreed, but it was conditional that Freed got Maurice Chevalier to play the part Lerner had created and get Cecil Beaton to do the costumes. Freed agreed. Lerner, still unhappy about not getting Fritz to compose the music, Lerner had done the first draft of the screenplay and doggedly resolved to have another crack at Fritz and said to him,
"The least he could do was to read the bloody script."
Jablonski writes,
Gigi would be just right for them, but it would have to wait until Loewe was finished with his French fling.
In the end, Fritz had read the script and loved it. Moreover, he was enticed with the sweetener of composing the music in Paris. Fritz was finally on board. Freed and Lerner were at lunch one day. Freed told Lerner he had secured Maurice Chevalier, an idol of Lerner, to play the uncle and the role of Gigi to be played by Leslie Caron, who Freed preferred because she was more Parisian than Audrey Hepburn, who had played the role on stage. Louis Jordan played the role of Gaston. Lerner wanted the actor Dirk Bogarde to play Gaston. However, he was under contract to J. Arthur Rank, who would not release him to do the picture. The work had begun on Gigi, and it was off to Paris for Lerner and Loewe. Lerner was pleased to have Maurice Chevalier on board, Earlier, when Lerner was working on the film musical An American in Paris, he wanted Chevalier to be in it. However, that did not work out, so Gigi gave him the chance to work with someone he admired from an early age. Lerner made an interesting comment on musical films in his book, The Street Where I Live.
One of the reasons musical films have all but disappeared from the screen is because there are no more great entertainers who can set the film's musical style. One never had to explain why Fred Astaire or Gene Kelly danced, or why Judy Garland or Bing Crosby sang. The fact of their presence automatically meant a musical.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling, I'm happy again. I'm laughing at clouds so dark up above. The sun's in my heart and I'm ready for love. Let the stormy clouds chase everyone from the place. Come on with the rain, I've a smile on my face. I'll walk down the lane with a happy refrain, just singing, singing in the rain, dancing in the rain.
Lerner and Loewe arrived into a rainy Paris and set to work on their first song, Thank Heaven for Little Girls, which was not without its problems. Lerner was struggling with some of the lines in the song. He was up most of the night working on it, he explains to Fritz in the morning.
I told him what I had been going through with those damn middle lines.
Fritz said,
What are you trying to say, dear boy?
I am trying to say something like this. Those little eyes so helpless and appealing, one day will flash and send you crashing through the ceiling.
What's wrong with that?
You can't crash through the ceiling. You crash through the floor.
Who says so? It's your lyric, and if you want to crash through the ceiling, crash through the ceiling.
At 6 in the morning, I was easily persuaded, and so I crashed through the ceiling.
Someday, each and every one of them will either be married or unmarried. How adorable they are. Each time I see a little girl of 5 or 6 or 7, I can't resist a joyous urge to smile and say thank heaven for little girls. For little girls get bigger every day. Thank heaven for little girls. They grow up in the most delightful way. Those little eyes so helpless and appealing, one day will flash and send you crashing through the ceiling. Thank heaven for little girls. Thank heaven for them all, no matter where, no matter who. Without them, what would little boys do? Thank heaven, thank heaven, thank heaven for little girls. This story is about a little girl. It could be any one of those little girls playing there, but it isn't. It's about one in particular, that one. Her name is Gigi. Gigi. What you have to look forward to. Gigi. Those little eyes so helpless and appealing, one day will flash and send you crashing through the ceiling. Thank heaven for little girls. Thank heaven for them all, no matter where, no matter who. Without them, what would little boys do? Thank heaven, thank heaven. Thank heaven for little girls.
Lerner's marriage to Nancy Olson fell apart due to his long stay in Paris. He was now seeing a lawyer, Micheline Muselli Pozzo di Borgo, who became his fourth wife. They had a son called Michael. There was an announcement in the New York Times of the wedding in 1957 with the heading,
Alan J. Lerner weds lawyer. Alan J. Lerner, author of the book and lyrics for My Fair Lady, and Micheline Muselli, Pozzo di Borgo, a lawyer, were married here last Friday. He couldn't have been happier.
Gigi, am I a fool without a mind, or have I merely been too blind to realize? Oh, Gigi, why you've been growing up before my eyes. Gigi, you're not at all that funny, awkward little girl I knew. Oh no, overnight there's been a breathless change in you. Oh Gigi, while you were trembling on the brink, was I out yonder somewhere blinking at a star? Oh Gigi, have I been standing up too close or back too far? When did your sparkle turn to fire and your warmth become desire? Oh, what miracle has made you the way you are?
In 1958, Loewe had suffered a heart attack and was admitted to hospital with Lerner by his side. Loewe was in hospital for weeks before being discharged to recover in Palm Springs, and on the French Riviera, he told a newsman that his heart attack was a warning sign about his overindulgences, shall we say, and that he drank in excess and smoked too much. He said it was a senseless, futile existence, Jablonski writes.
He skipped over his other senseless former activities, gambling and availing himself of the company of pretty young women.
Gigi was a roaring success and won 9 Oscars in 1959. Lerner would pick up 2 Oscars for Best Screenplay and Song, Loewe winning for Best Song as well.
Oh Gigi, while you were trembling on the brink, was I out yonder somewhere blinking at a star? Oh Gigi, have I been standing up too close or back too far? When did your sparkle turn to fire and your warmth become desire? Oh, what miracle has made you the way you are?
Those are the nominated songs. Now, who is the winner, do you know?
You open it, honey. I don't do sight bits.
Howard.
Ooh.
Gigi. From
Gigi. I'm out of love. Right out. This is a very great honor. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank you from the bottom of my somewhat damaged heart.
Lerner and Loewe were now back in New York, where anxiety set in for Lerner as what to do next. Jablonski writes.
Lerner was now confronted with two questions. What musical and would Loewe be able and willing?
Bud Whitney was Lerner's production manager, and he put a review on Lerner's desk in the New York Times to read about Arthurian legends called The Once and Future King by T. White. However, Lerner did not buy it until Moss Hart had contacted Lerner to ask him if he had read the book review in the Sunday Times. Lerner got the book, and it was decided by Moss Hart and Lerner to adapt the book. Fritz Loewe had his reservations about the project, and he also had his own health concerns to consider as well. Due to the enthusiasm of Moss Hart and Lerner, Loewe took some medical advice and said to Lerner,
"My boy, I'll try it one more time, but if it's too tough, or if I start to worry so much I can't work the way I want to, the next will be my last."
The project was initially called Jenny Kissed Me, but later changed to Camelot.
It's true. It's true. The crown has made it clear. The climate must be perfect all the year. A law was made a distant moon ago here. July and August cannot be too hot. And there's a legal limit to the snow here in Camelot. The winter is forbidden till December and exits March the 2nd on the dot. By order, summer lingers through September in Camelot. Camelot, Camelot. I know it sounds a bit bizarre, but in Camelot, Camelot, that's how conditions are. The rain may never fall till after sundown. By 8 the morning fog must disappear. In short, there's simply not a more congenial spot for happily ever aftering than here in Camelot.
The musical starred Richard Burton, Julie Andrews, Roddy McDowall, Robert Coote and Robert Goulet. It took 21 months to write Camelot.
Camelot, Camelot, I know it gives a person pause, but in Camelot, Camelot, those are the legal laws. The snow may never slush upon the hillside. By 9 p.m. the moonlight must appear. In short, there's simply not a more congenial spot for happily ever aftering than here in Camelot.
Lerner's fourth marriage to Micheline Muselli Pozzo di Borgo caused him a lot of anguish over their 8-year marriage, including suffering with a bleeding ulcer and hospitalized for a period. He was taking addictive medication to get through. Di Borgo had left him for Europe, taking their son Michael with her. Lerner was devastated and unable to work. He took some medical advice and started on some medication to get him through the period of working on Camelot and dealing with his estranged wife. The pair were eventually divorced in 1965. Lerner writes,
"All I can say is that if I had no flair for marriage, I also had no flair for bachelorhood."
If ever I would leave you, it wouldn't be in summer. Seeing you in summer, I never would go. Your hair streaked with sunlight, your lips red as flame, your face with a luster that puts gold to shame. But if I'd ever leave you, how could it be in autumn? How I'd leave in autumn, I never would know. is the air. I know you in autumn, and I must be there. And could I leave you running merrily through the snow, or on a wintry evening when you catch the fire's glow? If ever I would leave you, how could it be in springtime, knowing how in spring I'm bewitched by you so? Oh no, not in springtime, summer, winter, or fall. No, never could I leave you at all.
Camelot needed a lot of work and was initially too long and cut down considerably. Lerner later said,
Only Tristan and Isolde equaled it as a bladder endurance contest.
the show did get some positive reviews and eventually played on Broadway for over 2 years, and in the West End in London at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane with Lawrence Harvey as King Arthur. Camelot was Moss Hart's final Broadway show. He suffered a fatal heart attack in Palm Springs and died in 1961. The musical was made into a film in 1967 with Richard Harris and Vanessa Redgrave.
No, never could I leave you at all.
The musical has now been associated with the late President J.F. Kennedy as one of his favorite musicals. His widow, Jackie Kennedy, gave an interview that was in the Life magazine. In the interview, she stated that the show's original cast recording had been a favorite listening for her husband. Lerner and Kennedy were school pupils together. Jackie Kennedy compared her husband's tenure in the White House as Camelot, and that there'll be great presidents again, but there'll never be another Camelot. Lerner and Loewe's partnership was also coming to an end.
Each evening, from December to December, before you drift to sleep upon your cot, think back on all the tales that you remember of Camelot. Ask every person if he's heard the story, and tell it strong and clear if he has not, that once there was a fleeting wisp of glory called Camelot.
Camelot, Camelot, I know it gives a person pause, but in Camelot, Camelot, those were the legal laws.
Where once it never rained till after sundown. By 8 a.m. the morning fog had flown. Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment.
That was known as
The relationship between Lerner and Loewe had become strained over time, although Loewe once professed he loved Lerner in a platonic way. Jablonski writes,
They could no longer do the work required of them without tension and unspoken criticisms.
He goes on to say the pair worked without witnesses, but Lerner wanted his fourth wife, Micheline de Bourgo, to be present when they were working. As said before, Lerner's work took precedence over everything else, even his wives, so bringing in his wife, he tried to, as Jablonski said, ingratiated himself to Micheline. However, this was unacceptable to Loewe. Loewe threatened to bring in one of his girlfriends to the working sessions between them.
The breach deepened. There was barely a Lerner and Loewe anymore.
After Camelot, Loewe retired to Palm Springs, Cannes, and Paris. Lerner wanted to keep working, however the split was not well known at the time. There was a press announcement in the New York Post in 1960 which mentioned a collaboration with Lerner and the composer Richard Rodgers. Oscar Hammerstein was dying from cancer at this time, but the announcement was premature as both Lerner and Rodgers were committed to other projects. The announcement got Broadway excited, though. Art Buchwald wrote in his column, The Herald Tribune.
When lyricist Alan J. Lerner and composer Fritz Loewe got a divorce after producing Camelot, Mr. Lerner immediately found happiness with Richard Rodgers. Their marriage was announced in all the papers.
Hammerstein died in August 1960, but not before he imparted some advice for Rodgers. He wanted him to work with younger lyricists. Art Buchwald, the reporter, interviewed Loewe in Cannes about Lerner and Rodgers getting together and how he felt about it.
How can I be bitter about it? I am a great admirer of Richard Rodgers, and I think it inevitable, after Oscar Hammerstein's death, that Lerner should become Rodgers' partner.
The reporter asked Loewe if he had spoken to Lerner since the breakup. Loewe replied,
No, but all I can say is, even if we don't talk to each other, we'll always be good friends.
Lerner and Richard Rodgers shared the same lawyer, Irving Cohen, and it was he who brought them together. Lerner and Rodgers had a meeting and discussed some ideas. Lerner writes,
We discovered we talked the same language. We realized we had the same attitudes towards the theater, the same ideas about casting, management, and the breaking of theater molds.
Rodgers said of Lerner in his autobiography, Musical Stages,
From what I knew about Alan, his general philosophy and attitude toward the musical theater seemed closest to mine of any lyricist then active on Broadway. Even more important to me was the kind of theater he had come to represent. It had taste and style, and it said something.
Jablonski writes,
In Alan J. Lerner, Richard Rodgers was getting a little bit of Hammerstein and Hart. In Rodgers, Lerner was emphatically not getting an easygoing, hedonistic Frederick Loewe.
Their working styles were at odds with each other. It was decided to work on a musical initially called I Picked a Daisy, about a woman who could read minds and make flowers grow just by speaking to them. This was extrasensory perception, something Lerner had been interested in since childhood. It was a start for both of them, but no lyrics. Lerner struggled with the story, whilst at the same time having marital problems as well. He was only to achieve bits and pieces of the story, much to the frustration of Rodgers. Rodgers was a 9-to-5 guy, where Lerner wasn't. This would affect their working partnership, and Rodgers began to see this, and appointments were missed, where Lerner, for example, would go off to Capri in Naples when he should have been working on the project. Their partnership came to an end in 1963. Both Lerner and Rodgers were relieved. Rodgers was also suffering from cancer during this period. Lerner teamed up with Burton Lane again, and they both worked on the same musical I Picked a Daisy, which later became On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. Lerner was still having marital problems with Di Borgo and continuing to take medication in the form of amphetamines to help him work. Dr. Jacobson was giving Lerner pills to help him work, but unbeknown to Lerner, the pills were highly addictive. Jablonski writes,
Now partnered with Burton Lane and with chemical assistance from his doctor, Lerner was to begin again on his new musical.
Working with Burton Lane was not without its problems. Lane had to put up with Lerner and his marital problems. Work was slow. Jablonski writes,
Lane, like Rodgers before him, found Lerner elusive. On one occasion, they worked over a tune just before a weekend. Lerner listened, made his diminutive scribbles, and assured Lane he would have a completed lyric by Monday. On Sunday, the composer decided to find out how things were going and was told that his lyricist had gone to Paris.
Another example was when Burton Lane went to see Lerner at his home. Lerner fell asleep on Lane at their meeting. Jablonski writes,
Lane was eager to discuss the new lyric, but when he turned around, There sat his lyricist fast asleep.
He goes on to say Lane left a note saying, "When you wake, call me." Lerner was now divorced from his fourth wife, Micheline de Bourgo, and On a Clear Day You Can See Forever opened in Manhattan in 1965 and got good reviews. The musical was made into a film in 1969 with Barbra Streisand, directed by Vincente Minnelli. The musical was not a great success in the end, and both Lerner and Lane agreed. It was not much of a film musical, and they were both finished with each other. On a Clear Day You Can See Forever was considered as being one of the highlights on the film's soundtrack.
Well, so long, Doctor. See you later.
On a clear day, rise and look around you, and you'll see who you are. On a how it will astound you that the glow of your being outshines every star. You'll feel part of every mountain, sea, and shore. You can hear from far and near a world you've never heard before. And on a clear day, on that clear day, you can see forever and ever and ever and
Lerner was seeing Karen Gunderson, and she eventually became his fifth wife in 1966. Lerner teamed up with Andre Previn to work on his new musical, Coco, about the life of Coco Chanel, which starred Katharine Hepburn in her first and only appearance in a stage musical. The production opened on Broadway at the Mark Hellinger Theatre in 1969. Hepburn left the production 8 months in, and the musical closed 2 months after. Once again, there were problems with Lerner working with a new composer. Andre Previn was frustrated with Lerner, who he said was constantly on the run. Lerner was at this time busy with the film versions of Paint Your Wagon and On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. Previn threatened that he would lock Lerner up in a room to get him to finish the lyrics. Coco the musical didn't fare well. It got bad reviews, and the only shining light was Katharine Hepburn, the theatre historian Gerald Boardman wrote.
Alan J. Lerner provided the book and lyrics with the rhymes outshining the libretto as usual. The songs were by Andre Previn, a well-known composer and conductor. They were undistinguished. The show's obvious prop remained. Miss Hepburn, who was on stage virtually from beginning to end, coasting through on her unique glamour.
Jablonski writes,
in his Coco, Lerner had created a tough yet vulnerable character, an artist driven like him to excel in her professional life. The real Coco died the following year in 1970, in her late 80s. By that time, Alan Lerner had moved on to his next project.
Lerner's next project was to put on a musical based on the novel Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Lolita is a black comedy which follows a middle-aged man who writes as Humbert. He is sexually infatuated with young adolescent Dolores Hayes, whom he calls Lolita. The theme of the musical was daring and had previously been made into a film with James Mason, directed by Stanley Kubrick. Lerner worked with the film composer John Barry in Majorca, where Barry had a home, and also in London. The score took 8 months to write. The musical opened in 1971 in Philadelphia and later on in Boston. The musical was not a success, and it was John Barry's first time writing for musical theatre. Lerner went back to New York, licking his wounds with the disappointment of Lolita. Lerner wanted to persuade Loewe out of retirement in Palm Springs and sent him a film script of The Little Prince, a sci-fi fantasy musical film based on the 1943 novella Le Petit Prince by the writer Count Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Loewe had read the script and was excited, Lerner writes.
He called me filled with excitement, and I went out to see him. 11 years had slipped away, and it was pre-Camelot again.
However, in the meantime, the pair worked on the stage version of Gigi in 1973. But it was not a success. They worked together in Palm Springs at Loewe's home and wrote 4 new songs for the staged version. Jablonski writes about the staged version of Gigi.
The idea that had seemed to work on paper but did not, however, work well on stage.
The pair went back to work on The Little Prince, and Lerner thought that Loewe had composed a great score filled with melody. The film's premiere was in 1974 at the Radio City Music Hall and didn't get good reviews. Lerner himself mentions that the score was butchered by the director Stanley Donen. Lerner basically thinks he messed up Fritz's score for the film, and he was inept. Jablonski writes,
Lerner's great regret was that after the warm and wonderful time he and Loewe had working on it, their informal manner, joking, teasing, enjoying their work, it was all in his view for nothing.
Unlike the theater where the author is the final authority, in motion pictures, it is the director, and if one falls in the hands of some cinematic Bigfoot, one pays the price for someone else's ineptitude. In this case, the price was high because undoubtedly it was Fritz's last score.
It was announced in 1972 that Lerner and Leonard Bernstein would work on a new musical which had a working title as Opus 1 and was financed by Coca-Cola. Such an announcement got people gossiping with excitement and speculation. Lerner and Bernstein worked on the musical within the political backdrop of the Nixon presidency, and both Lerner and Bernstein shared some political views of the times. For example, they were both against the Vietnam War and anti-Nixon. The musical was part of the bicentennial celebrations in 1976. The musical examined the establishment of the White House and its occupants from 1800 to 1900. Lerner comments about working with a new composer.
Anytime you're writing with a new composer or lyricist, you do influence each other, and you should in order to produce a new voice of your own. With Lenny, I usually write the lyrics first. With Fritz, I used to write the lyrics second.
Who is blowing on that horn on this quiet Sabbath morn? The Marine Band, the Marine Band.
The musical, now renamed 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, was a flop and only ran for 7 performances. One critic, Ted Callum, said of the musical,
"The British burned the White House in 1812, and Lerner and Bernstein are running the fire sale."
It was Bernstein's last original score for Broadway, and there was not even a cast album, apart from a few pieces re-recorded. Both Lerner and Bernstein were equally disappointed. Bernstein quoted as saying,
"I'm so shattered by the whole thing. The score was so fragmented. Not at all what I wrote. I do hope to salvage some of it somehow."
Lerner said of the failure,
"I am not discouraged. If failure discouraged me, I would have quit long ago."
Coca-Cola lost over $1 million with this venture, and they realized show business was in fact no business at all. Lerner had split with his 5th wife, Karen Gunderson, in 1974, and I hope you're keeping up with me here. He was now married to Sandra Payne, his 6th wife in the same year, 1974, who was English. But that also failed in 1976, and she returned to England, and Lerner had married Nina Bushkin, aged 25, in 1977, his 7th wife, and she was considerably younger than Lerner. Lerner was twice her age, he was 59. Lerner teamed up with the composer Burton Lane again, and with librettist Joseph Stein to work on his next musical Carmelina, about an Italian woman who brings up her teenage daughter, Gia. Once again, there were problems working with Burton Lane, who was initially reluctant to work with Lerner again. He put down some conditions for Lerner to keep to if he was going to work with him again. These conditions were not all kept by Lerner. For example, telling Lane if he was planning any trips abroad, Lerner went off to Australia without telling Lane. During this time, Lerner was writing his autobiography and trying to give up smoking. He went to see a hypnotist, and he tried acupuncture, neither of which worked, and he succumbed to smoking again, a habit that would eventually take his life. Carmelina opened in 1979 at the St. James Theatre, and the critics were not kind to it. The musical only ran for 17 performances. His marriage to Nina Bushkin was also on thin ice, and to make matters worse, his 4th wife, Micheline, sued him and was awarded substantial monies, which didn't help him or his health. He eventually divorced from Nina Bushkin in 1980. She spoke out at the time.
"I loved him when I married him 3 years ago. I didn't notice the age. Alan is very young at heart, but when we were with his friends, it became very obvious some of his friends are 80 years old."
After the divorce, Lerner was off to England and settled in Chelsea. There was a revival of My Fair Lady with a new Eliza, with actor Liz Robertson in 1979. Lerner fell for her whilst he guest-directed the musical. They got married in 1981, which was to be his 8th and final marriage. Lerner embarked on his 13th musical, his lucky number apparently, with composer Charles Strauss, called Dance a Little Closer, an updated version of Robert E. Sherwood's 1936 anti-war comedy Idiot's Delight. Both Burton Lane and Leonard Bernstein had forewarned Strauss about Lerner missing appointments and unreliability. But Strauss was having none of it. The lyrics on this occasion arrived on time. The musical is set in the future, in the Grand Alpine Berkeley Palace Hotel. The guests find themselves in the midst of a potential nuclear Armageddon. The musical only ran for one performance and closed in 1983. The critics again were not kind. The New York Times critic Frank Rich said it was
a huge, extravagant mishmash that seems to have taken on a rampaging, self-destructive life of its own.
From the highs you get from a man. No man is worth all the hopes you get from the lies you get from a man. The strum of guitars till the strings start to snap. The flight to the moon till the wings start to flap. No man is worth it, and I mean none. Not even, well, maybe one in St. Paul who had more on the ball than I saw on any other. The fool that I am, for the one in the family he wanted was my brother. And that one from St. Joe who unraveled me so when he covered me over with kisses. There was nothing he lacked, I mean nothing. In fact, he had everything plus a missus. No man is worth all the burns you get from the flame you get for a man. No man is worth all the fun you get from the games you get from a man. The torrid hellos and the Arctic goodbyes. The pillow you shared where you cry out your eyes. No man is worth letting one tear fall. No man is worth all the second all. No man is worth it beneath the sun. Not even, no, not even one. So far, well, maybe wherever you are.
Lerner returned to London and Chelsea from New York and started on his next project called My Man Godfrey with composer Gerald Kenny. An announcement was made in 1985 about the musical, which was based on screenplay by Maury Riskind and Eric Hatch. A film of the same name had been made in 1936 with Carole Lombard and William Powell. The story is basically about a socialite who employs a hobo to be her family's butler and then falls in love with him. Lerner and Kenny started to work on the musical, and Lerner was calling Kenny "my boy." Echoes of Loewe there. Also, he said to Kenny one day,
"My boy, if only I can make it past 67.
Lerner's father, Joseph, died aged 67 of cancer. During the work on My Man Godfrey, Lerner flew to New York to receive a Johnny Mercer Award and received another award from the John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts in December 1985. Fritz Loewe was in attendance, and it would be the last time the two would be together. Lerner returned to London, and all was not well with his health. In early February 1986, he had been diagnosed with lung cancer and was receiving treatment. The musical of My Man Godfrey was not completed, but he was able to finish his book on the musical theatre, which was published in 1986, and he was able to work briefly with Andrew Lloyd Webber on his new musical, Phantom of the Opera. Richard Stilgoe was doing the lyrics at that point, and Cameron McIntosh, a theatrical producer, arranged a meeting with Richard, Alan, and Andrew to discuss the lyrics and to listen to Lerner's observations. It was suggested by Cameron that Lerner look at the libretto and work with Andrew on it. Andrew Lloyd Webber recalled in his autobiography, Unmasked, a memoir, that Lerner was having difficulty climbing the stairs for their first meeting. Andrew writes,
"He had to sit down on a half landing to get his breath back. I remember his colour was alabaster, but he became passionate about our project and had a lot of time for Richard's material."
Andrew goes on to say there was much work needed to do, and that Lerner was adamant they first tackled the Act II opener, Masquerade, Andrew writes.
We blanked March out to begin, but fate had already decreed that I was not to work with this legend a few days later. Alan was diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Lerner writes a letter to Andrew.
Dearest Andrew, who would have thought it, instead of writing the Phantom of the Opera, I end up looking like him. But alas, the inescapable fact is I have lung cancer. I am deeply disconsolate about the Phantom and the wonderful opportunity it would have been to write with you. But I will be back. I shall be thinking of you and Sarah and Richard and Cameron all the way. And I know you will have the success. God knows you deserve it. It's a wonderful score, and I am heartbroken that I cannot get a crack at it.
Makes you glad, makes you proud, all the creme de la creme.
Watching us,
and
watching them
in
the past.
6 months
of relief, of delight,
of Elysian peace.
and we can breathe at last.
No more ghosts.
Here's a health.
Here's a toast to a prosperous year, to the new chandelier.
And these years, what a joy, what a change,
what a blessed release, and what a masquerade.
Lerner's condition had deteriorated in April 1986, and he returned to New York, where he died on the 14th of June, 1986, surrounded by his wife Liz, son Michael, and his daughters Jennifer and Liza. Alan J. Lerner, along with Fritz Loewe, who died 2 years later in 1988, wrote musicals in the same way as Rodgers and Hammerstein. A book musical, they did not believe in messages in a musical, just that people come back to the theatre and see them again. Their musicals were not gritty and portrayed an idealized view of life. Lerner struggled to reach the same success he had with Loewe. He was a driven workaholic, which cost him dearly in terms of his personal life, which was turbulent. After the split from Loewe, he never stopped challenging himself, working with different composers over the years. He drank the champagne with the successes and took the failures on the chin. He was unable to stay with the same woman. Like he said, he had no flair for marriage or bachelorhood. He couldn't win until his last marriage. He never gave up. Even in the last year of his life, he was still working. Despite his cancer, he, along with Loewe, left a rich collection of music and lyrics which inspired others who came after them. I shall finish with his own words, not mine.
I write not because it is what I do, but because it is what I am. Not because it is how I make my living, but how I make my life. And I have traveled the bumpy road of love enough to have worn it smooth, and I am now happily married.